Well, today I want to continue with our series, our 8th message on the Sermon on the Mount series, and to pick up where we left off in Matthew 5:31. So if you'd like to follow along, pick up a Bible with a Besorah in the back there. Hi, maybe you could bring a few in and just hand them out to anyone who would like. And this is a section that I'm calling Torah from the Inside Out. Torah from the Inside Out. And you have heard it said, Yeshua says, yet I say to you. Think of the commandments that Yeshua talks about like blossoming flowers. Yeshua's intention here is to draw out the inner heart of the flower. We've looked at the heart of do not murder. Most recently, a couple of weeks ago, we unpacked Yeshua's pointed words about adultery. That message is now up on the website. Thank you, Ralph, if you missed it. And now we move to his commentary on divorce. Matthew 5:31 through 32. And it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Yet I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. Okay, so these are challenging words, are they not? We have a value here at Ruach that we don't skip over harder topics. We talk about them, we wrestle with them a bit, and then we try to understand them together. And first, I want to recognize that many people here at Ruach have struggled through difficult marriages or gone through divorce, and I understand how devastating that is. At Ruach, we really do understand that we live in a broken world where ideals don't always come to pass. We tilt toward mercy and understand that life is sometimes just difficult, complicated, and not as we wish it would have been. And yes, Yeshua can indeed redeem all things. At the same time, the divorce rate in 2023 is still roughly 50%. Second and third marriages, 67 and 74% respectively. So perhaps Yeshua's words here can inspire us with a renewed vision for sacred marriage. Let's unpack this passage. It was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Now, I want to unpack this in 3 parts. First, to understand this commandment in Torah on its own. Then secondly, we'll look at the dynamics in the first century that inform Yeshua's words. And then as a backdrop, we'll look at Yeshua's words in context. So Yeshua is referring to Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 2. And this is how that verse goes. Suppose a man takes a wife and marries her. Now, if she doesn't find favor in his eyes, because he has found something indecent in her, he has to write her a certificate of divorce and hand it to her and send her out from his house. When she leaves his house, she may go and become another man's wife. So let's unpack this commandment on its own, and then we'll look at how Yeshua sees this. The Hebrew phrase that the TLV translates as indecent is arvat davar. Its meaning is it's not totally clear. Judaism has wrestled with this phrase. Literally, davar is a word or thing or a matter, probably a matter in this case, and ervat has something to do with nakedness. So some interpret this as limited to sexual immorality or adultery. But the same phrase is also used in the chapter before in the context of digging trenches or digging latrines. So others suggest that this might mean something repulsive or something obnoxious. Whatever the thing was, whatever the matter was in the passage, it causes the man to hold contempt for her in his eyes. So then he wants to send her away. If so, the man must write her a sefer karitut, a certificate of divorce. And then early rabbinic Hebrew, this certificate of divorce is called a get. Now, at first glance, this seems to favor the husband at the expense of the wife. But in context of the culture of the ancient world, this passage actually favors the woman. The Torah here is not giving permission for a man to divorce his wife. Instead, these verses provide security for the already divorced. wife by placing a critical limitation on the husband. If you're going to send your wife away, you must write her a get. That's the idea. So an angry husband cannot just drive his wife from his home and onto the streets while claiming that she's still his wife. She would be condemned in those days to live alone with no one to protect her, in shame, unable to bear children for the rest of her life. Instead, he must send her away. If he must send her away, he needs to first involve members of the community, pay her what is due in the ketubah, the contract, and give her a document that stated that she could marry someone else. Now, the reason this Torah only legislates the husband's process is because women were more vulnerable. If a wife wanted a divorce in early Judaism, she could petition a rabbinic court, and the court would require the husband to give her a get. Now, regardless of the times, a get in Judaism is important if a marriage fails. Anything that is sacred must be sacred at both ends. When we do acts that sanctify the beginning of a relationship, if that relationship breaks down, there must be some act that ends that sacred space. Sanctity does not evaporate on its own. Kiddushin, Jewish marriage, sanctifies a sacred union between a man and a woman, and a get recognizes that this sacred union has dissolved. There's a critical difference between a divorce procedure in a civil court and a get in a rabbinic court. In a civil court, the court pronounces a couple divorced. In a rabbinical court, the divorce action is effected through the wife accepting the get from her husband, releasing her, and then the rabbinical court simply watches to make sure that the community is involved, that the procedure has been carried out properly, and that the wife is taken care of. So to summarize this point, Moses is not commending divorce. The prophet Malachi emphasizes that the Torah's intention for marriage, do not betray the wife of your youth, for I hate divorce, says Adonai, the God of Israel. Instead, Moses is regulating divorce as an act of compassion for vulnerable women who would otherwise be held captive in an already failed marriage. Now, in Yeshua's day, the matter of divorce was a hot topic. 3 first-century rabbis who lived in Yeshua's day are recorded in Talmud in a debate about Deuteronomy 24 and divorce. The school of Shammai said that a man may not divorce his wife unless he finds her as having engaged in adultery. The school of Hillel interprets Ervat Davar as any shortcoming at all. He may divorce her simply because she burned his food or oversalted his dish, Hillel says. Now, in Fiddler on the Roof, when the students are studying with the rabbi and he says, so he can divorce her for burning his toast? They were studying this passage of Talmud. Rabbi Akiva jumps in 20, 30 years later. He may divorce her even if he found another woman who is better looking than her, as it is stated, if she finds no favor in his eyes. Now, later rabbinic tradition tended to follow Hillel's more lenient approach in general. However, not entirely. Rabbi Elazar, a member of the school of Hillel, commented on this discussion in Gemara, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, which is reflecting these first-century traditions. He said, when a man divorces his wife, even the altar sheds tears. And then he cited Malachi, because the Lord was a witness between you and the wife of your youth, whom you have betrayed, though she is your companion and the wife of your covenant. Now, in most areas, Yeshua sides more with the lenient school of Hillel. For example, Hillel and Yeshua agree on healing on Shabbat, ritual purity laws, that the Torah is summed up in love God and do to others what you would do to yourself. But here, when it comes to sexual purity and the sanctity of marriage, Yeshua seems to identify more with the school of Shammai. To get a bit more clarity, let's look at Yeshua's discussion on divorce that happens later in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 through 12. Excuse me. So here's how it goes. Pharisees come to test Yeshua, and they ask him, is it permitted for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? Do you see the connection here to the discussion with Hillel and Shammai? For any reason at all? For burning toast? Now, in light of the discussions on Deuteronomy 24 between Hillel and Shammai, this question makes sense. In the first century, the Pharisees themselves debated this question, and no matter how Yeshua answered, he would make an enemy. But rather than debate the precise meaning of the words in Deuteronomy 24, Yeshua goes right to the beginning, to God's deeper purposes for marriage. He says, haven't you read? He who created them from the beginning made them male and female, Zakar and Nekavah, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. For Yeshua, marriage is established in the union of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden. God carefully fashioned Zakar and Nekavah, male and female, specifically in order that the two might be joined together as one flesh in marriage. Marriage in Judaism is called Kedushin. Kedushin means comes from the Hebrew root that means holy. Holy in Judaism means set apart. So there seems to be two purposes for marriage in Bereshit, in Genesis. The first purpose is new life. The marital union, Kedushin, is so holy that it carries the potential to partner with God in the most holy of tasks, to create a new human life, a new eternal person also made in the image of God. The second is that Adam and Chava each have unique qualities that make them ideal lifelong companions intended to live fully interdependent lives together. At first, Adam looks to every other creature searching for an ezer, but he cannot find one. So God makes Chava. Chava is Hebrew for Eve, life. God makes Chava, made also in the divine image and equal to Adam, but also unique and mysteriously different from Adam. Chava is called an ezer. Okay, sometimes people translate ezer as helper. It can also be translated treasure, as treasure. And this term is used to refer to God, the God of your fathers, an ezer to you, who blesses you with blessings of heaven above. It's a neat way of looking at that passage. So Yeshua answers the Pharisees' questions about divorce by pointing to God's original design for marriage, a man and a woman who come together for life by God's design to form a sacred partnership set apart for any other kind of human relationship. The miracle of their mysterious union blends his masculine constitution with her unique treasures to build new life in the world, to birth new life in the world, I should say. Yeshua's answer is that God never intended for a divorce process to be needed at all. Now, this leads to an important question with those questioning him. Ask him next, well, then why did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and send her away? It's a good question. Yeshua answers them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Now I tell you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Now, remember what Yeshua said a few verses earlier in the Sermon on the Mount. I have not come to abolish the Torah, but to fill the Torah full. So Yeshua is not undoing Moses' regulation for divorce. Yeshua and Moses are answering different questions. Moses was trying to protect a woman from hard-hearted, selfish man who would abuse her. The provision for a get was already well established in the first century. He didn't need to affirm this. Now, Yeshua is trying to undo a misreading of Moses' provision that allowed a man to divorce his wife for burning his toast. Yeshua is asking us to read Deuteronomy 24 in light of God's original intent for marriage in the Garden of Eden. It's not an abrogation of a man's responsibility to care for his ezer, his treasured wife of his youth. But rather, in the midst of a tragedy, it's a legislation that would free a woman made in the image of God from a life sentence of abuse and neglect and abandonment, a counterfeit of God's design for marriage. Now, Yeshua says divorce leads to adultery for both the man and the woman in remarriage. Yeshua is not saying a divorced person should not remarry. I want to say that again. Yeshua is not saying a divorced person should not remarry. Instead, he's pointing to the wake of devastation that inevitably follows a broken marriage covenant. While the get is an important part of the healing process, and a person can remarry after it's formalized, Still, something sacred has been ruptured. It's like the glass that we smash at the close of the wedding ceremony. We can never put all the pieces back the way they were before. A broken marriage injures everyone and isn't something anyone fully recovers from. It carries a wake of hurt into our future relationships, just as it passes down hurt to the children and their children. Yeshua is calling us to rise above the broken world. The Son of Man is here among us. The kingdom of God is among you. In Yeshua, your marriages must look different, reflecting the true intention from the beginning. Now, Yeshua adds this clause to his teaching, except in the case of adultery. It's interesting. The big question is whether Yeshua means that this is the only exception, or are there other exceptions that fit under this category? It's interesting that Mark and Luke's version of this same teaching leave this exception out entirely. And I think that this highlights that they understood Yeshua to be sharing larger values and principles rather than new halakhic laws. Mark and Luke assumed that we knew there were exceptions. And I think that adultery represents more of a category. Adultery automatically annuls a marriage. The two are no longer one in the same way, and the sacred nature of the marriage covenant has already been broken. For Shaul or the Apostle Paul, followers of Yeshua must hold an extremely high regard for marriage. However, he offers a different exception to the principle. This is in 1 Corinthians. If an unbelieving husband or a wife abandons the marriage, Paul says, the brother or sister is not bound in such cases, but God has called you to shalom. So Matthew records Yeshua's exception in the case of adultery. Paul adds to this in the case of abandonment. Both cases, their instructions are to follow Moses' procedures for divorce. Both protect the vulnerable in marriage. Rabbi Russ Resnick comments on this. The best way to understand Shaul's teaching is as halakha that sets aside a specific Torah restriction on divorce because of a supervening concern of Torah. Each man and woman is made in the image of God and is to be treated with dignity and fairness, not held in bondage to a marriage that now exists on paper only, but is at peace, shalom, to remarry. I think Rabbi Russ is onto something here. Torah from the inside out in these verses is a recognition of the divine image within one another. Torah says, do not murder. Yet I say, don't even hold anger against your brother. Why? Because he is made in the divine image. Torah says, do not commit adultery. Yet I say, do not even look with lust after a woman. Why? Because she is made in the divine image. Torah says, if you send your wife away, give her a get. Yet I say to you, do not even consider sending her away in the first place. Why? Because she is made in the divine image. And yet there are tragic circumstances that explicitly break the sacred marriage covenant and desecrate the divine image within. I think that there may be other circumstances that follow the same pattern of adultery and abandonment, physical or mental abuse, or incessant anger and rage puts a divine image bearer in an emotional prison cell and tears her apart. The sacred nature of a marriage covenant is dashed to pieces, just the same as with an adulterous affair. And certainly this kind of abuse is included within the hardness of heart that Yeshua tells us about. Now, this doesn't mean that these offenses require divorce. If the offender practices genuine repentance and demonstrates a long-term change, then reconciliation and renewal is still possible. Again, in Rabbi Russ's words, divorce is never a good thing. But if the abuse is chronic and the abuser is unrepentant, divorce might be the lesser of two evils, and a matter of setting aside one aspect of Torah to preserve a higher one. Now, the reality is that with many failing marriages, conflict is complicated. Hurt runs deep, and partners wound each other, provoking what seems like endless cycles of abuses. And who can tell where it began? Amy Jill Levine comments, a marriage that looks like a battlefield is not a marriage sanctioned by God. One marriage counselor has said, usually there isn't just two sides, there are three. There's his side, her side, and then what's really happening. And sometimes what's really happening is quite complex. Marriage is not for the faint of heart. Now, when the disciples hear Yeshua's words in Matthew 19, they say, "Oi, it's better not to marry." And Yeshua reminds the disciples, he says, listen, I won't quote the passage, but I'll explain it. He says, not everyone needs to enter into marriage. Some, he says, are born in such a way that they will not be able to marry. Others will not be able to marry because of the broken world around them, things that have been done to them. And still others will choose of their own accord not to marry for the sake of the coming kingdom of heaven. And this was the calling of most of the disciples. For those who do enter into the sacred covenant of marriage, do not do so lightly, and be willing to do the work it requires to cultivate a marriage that is truly set apart and different from those of the world around us. The big point here is that following Yeshua's guide for sacred marriage does not mean silently suffering through abuse and pain, just as much as it also doesn't mean running to divorce when things become difficult. Yeshua is not giving us a black and white application of a particular verse. Instead, he's calling us to a response from within. We must never trivialize the sacred relationship of marriage. And as followers of Yeshua, we have the obligation only to enter marriage carefully with a lot of intentionality, but once married, to continue investing and growing together, always cultivating deeper and deeper levels of intimacy. And when a marriage is struggling, we must literally do everything we can to work and save and restore the marriage, all the more so if there are children involved who will inherit the pain. There's a statistic that demonstrates that struggling couples facing divorce who decide to fight for their marriage consider themselves significantly happier in life 5 years later compared to those who opted for divorce. The work is worth it. At the same time, in extreme cases, when there is adultery, abandonment, or ongoing abuse of some kind, and after going through all the steps and really giving it your best shot and change just isn't a reality, then because of this hardness of heart, we might say, Moses laid out provisions for divorce, and let it be for shalom, and may Yeshua bring healing. Now, I've started to work on a marriage program that will help teach the most critical marriage tools, and that Rain and I have kind of discovered over the past 17 years. And one day, perhaps we'll do a marriage seminar. But for now, I want to close by just highlighting a few of the most important tools that we found keep marriage sacred. The prayer tool is the first one, the prayer tool. A healthy marriage must share life with God together. You must let God set your vision for your marriage. You must seek God first in your problems and struggles together. You must stay on the same team. And if you can pray out loud together every day, you will stay together. Nothing is more vulnerable in marriage than genuine prayer together. Second is the visioning tool. I love this tool. Sometimes we joke, she's my other half. But really, marriage means two whole people, a man and a woman, coming together synergistically to become more than what they could be on their own. You must have a shared vision for your marriage that is beyond yourself and is caught up in God's greater purposes. Then there are other things. I'm just highlighting a few things here. The communication toolkit. Learn what never to say to each other. First on that list is the divorce word, by the way. Learn to listen. Learn to empathize deeply. Learn to confront each other gently. Learn to apologize with lasting change. Learn to forgive quickly. The Musar toolkit. A sacred marriage requires husbands and wives to view marriage not primarily as a means to their own happiness. Happiness is good, but not primarily as a means to their own happiness, but more as a means to becoming more godly. Marriage is a reflection which highlights weaknesses in our character, and so we must use marriage to become more godly people in love, in patience, in self-control, endurance, in gentleness, in humility, in hope. And my favorite, what I call advanced skills towards the art of marriage. The art of servanthood. The longer I'm married, the more I see my responsibility is to serve Reina in everything. The art of admiration, the art of romance, the art of joy. One day we'll open these up, maybe a book one day. But for now, I'll close with the community tool. A healthy marriage must be part of a larger community. Today, in our country, we have the privilege of being able to seek out really great and highly trained professional counselors who can come alongside and help. And I think everyone should go to marriage counseling, however healthy you are, because it's wonderful. But in addition to professional help, the chuppah requires witnesses. A get requires witnesses. We need communities to help navigate these difficult waters and to help make sometimes very difficult decisions. Marriage is so sacred that we must never go it alone. Marriage is intended to be modeled and lived out and supported in communities where you can go to each other and seek counsel and help and support each other when things are tough or even if it doesn't work. Rain and I, or Rabbi Rich and Sue, and all of you here can come alongside and journey together. And, you know, there are those of you here who have been widowed and have seen marriage through to the end. You have a very special honor and a place in our community. And you have a role that must be honored. That's important. You are a role model for the rest of us. And those of you who are single for other reasons, you also have a role here too, as critical parts of the family. Ruach Israel marriages and families need you, and you need Ruach Israel marriages and families. As a community, we must all work together to support healthy and intentional marriages and families. And this way, we become one larger Ruach Israel family. So with that, a Shabbat Shalom to you all.